So it's been more than 40 years that you've been doing this. So how do you find the hope? You know, I think that's when I look at what you do. And I mean, I have millions of questions for you. How do you find the hope? I'm assuming, because when you say it's not about you, it's about your, you know, it's about humans and other people, and this is a movement. And there's a lot of courage when I watch the people that are around you, and there's a lot of commitment and this kind of fearless approach. So anyway, I'm not going to answer the question for you. How do you find the hope, though, to continue this many years on?
Well, as I said before, you do what you do now for the future, and don't worry about the consequences. You just have to concentrate on doing what you can.
How do you not worry about the consequences, really? Because isn't that a lot about what this is about? I mean, I worry about the consequences, and I'm trying to do what I can do in the time that I have. But it is a worry when you have a 6-month-old child. You know, that is when it becomes the concern, when you look at your kids.
But the consequences will be determined by our species. Are we going to stand up and protect ourselves?
Yeah.
I'm always optimistic. I've always said that the solution to an overwhelming and impossible problem is to find an impossible solution. And impossible solutions can be found. In 1972, the very idea that Nelson Mandela would be president of South Africa was unthinkable and impossible, and yet it became possible. Yeah. And so I think that especially with young people today, I think there's more and more awareness than there has ever been that these impossible solutions can be found.
So you grew up really at the beginnings of all of this in a place where it wasn't talked about or thought about. I wouldn't think much. It was the opposite, I assume, because that was the country, talking Canada. And
Canada. In fact, when I was 10 years old, I saw a seal killed on the beach in New Brunswick, and I said to myself at the time that if I could do anything to stop that, I would. So later with Greenpeace, I organized the Greenpeace campaigns against the seal hunt. And,
but nobody knew about the seal hunting before those campaigns. I don't feel like growing up in England, it wasn't something people knew about.
We were opposed to it, but really what we needed was a boost, and we got that in 1977 when we took Bridget Bardot to the ice. And she guaranteed us the cover of the magazines around the world, and that was really what led to the, the diminishment of sealing. It took a few years, but Europe banned seal pelts, and she really made a great contribution towards that. Really, the media can only understands 4 elements of any story. Sex, scandal, violence, and celebrity. And if you don't have one of those elements, you don't have a story. If you have all 4 elements, you've got the super story that never goes away. So we always try to incorporate these elements. I think that probably the best example of that is back in 1984, I organized a campaign against the killing of wolves in northern British Columbia and the Yukon. And we had them shooting wolves, which was violent. They were threatening to shoot us, which was violent.
And they're allowed to shoot wolves? Why? They're culling them? What's the excuse?
Yeah, for big game hunters want them down because they're...
And their excuse is to cull them. They can't.
And then we had scandal because the environment minister was caught taking a bribe from a big game hunting official. So to round this up, to have all 4 elements, I asked Bo Derek to be our spokesperson. And that gave us the other 2 elements. Right. And at the press conference, a reporter from the Vancouver Sun said, "This is stupid. Why do you have Bo Derek? She's no authority on wolves. Why is she your spokesperson?" I said, well, if I had the best wolf biologist in the world, Dr. David Meck or Dr. Gordon Haber, nobody would be here, you wouldn't listen to us. But I see the room's full of journalists. It'll be the front page of your paper. Tomorrow you're going to write it, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it.
Because the real core of what you're doing is so massively important. It's like, for me, it's such a weighted, the issue is so huge.
It is.
So how disappointing is it to you that you have to have celebrities involved? Does it disappoint you or not? Are you fine with it? You're used to it?
Well, it's not that I'm disappointed or not. It's the only thing that works, really. There's 3 laws of ecology. The law of diversity, the strength of an ecosystem is dependent upon diversity within it. The law of interdependence, so species are interdependent with each other, and the law of finite resources, that there's a limit to growth, a limit to carrying capacity. What we're doing is stealing the carrying capacity from these other species. They go extinct, but in the end, we will pay for it. Because if you look at the Earth as a spaceship, which is what it is, we're traveling around the galaxy, and every spaceship has a life support system. And that life support system provides the air we breathe, the food we eat, it regulates temperature and climate. And that life support system is the ocean, primarily, and it's maintained by crew. And we're not crew, we're passengers on Spaceship Earth. We're having a great time amusing ourselves. But we're killing the crew. And there's only so many crew members you kill before things begin to fall apart. And the real problem here is we have this anthropocentric point of view. It permeates all of our species now. That we're the most important species on the planet. We matter. Everything revolves around us.
Yeah.
And that's going to be our undoing if we don't change that. I've always said that to animals, every human being is a Nazi. The way we treat them.
Yeah.
And but the problem is people are so or alienated from the reality of these as self-aware sentient beings.
Yeah.
They just don't seem to understand that. That's a very painful thing for me when I look at an animal and realize that the average human being doesn't see an animal. They see a thing that can be utilized for their own purposes.
Yeah. Do you get disappointed that it's that you have to be this kind of shocking and aggressive? Like, does it disappoint? Is it saddening? For me, I always find that people, you know, that's like you say, they respond to 4 things. Is that your natural way, or is that where you've arrived because you've had to be that way?
You know, there's one experience I had in my life that changed my entire point of view, and that was in 1975 when we were confronting the Russian whaling fleet in the North Pacific. And we had come up with this idea to save whales by putting our bodies between the whales and the harpoons. We were reading a lot of Gandhi then. We thought this was going to work.
Yeah.
And so Robert Hunter and I found ourselves in a small little rubber boat in front of a Soviet harpoon vessel bearing down on us at full speed, and in front of us there were 8 magnificent sperm whales that were fleeing for their life. And every time the harpooner took a shot, I would maneuver the boat to block it. And this worked for about 25 minutes until the captain came down the catwalk and he screamed into the ear of the harpooner, and then he looked at us and smiled and went like this. And I realized, well, Gandhi's not going to work for us today.
Yeah.
And a few moments later, there was an incredible explosion, and the harpoon went over her head, slammed into the backside of a female in the pod. She screamed, there was a fountain of blood, and the largest whale slammed the water with his tail, disappeared, swam right underneath of us, threw himself out of the water straight at the harpooner to protect his pod. They were ready for him with an unattached harpoon, shot him point blank in the head. He fell back in the water, blood everywhere, rolling in agony, and as he rolled in agony, I caught his eye. He looked at me. He dove. Now I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming real fast towards us. And he came up and out of the water at an angle like this, so that the next move is to come crashing down on us. Would have killed us. But as he rose up out of the water, I looked into this eye the size of my fist, and what I saw in that eye, first of all, I saw the reflection of myself in the eye, but what I saw in there was understanding, that this whale understood what we were trying to do, because I could see the effort he made to pull himself back, and he began to slide back into the sea. I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface, and he died. Could have killed us, but chose not to do so. So I personally owe my life to that whale. And as I was sitting there, the sun was going down in the middle of the Soviet whaling fleet, I said to myself, why are we killing these whales? You know, you can't eat whale meat. They were killed for oil, for high heat resistant lubricating oil. And one of the
so old school, isn't it? It's
and also,
so old school.
Also, the main reason was for lubricating oil for the manufacture of weapons, including intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I said, here we are, killing these incredibly beautiful, intelligent, self-aware, sentient creatures for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when I said to myself, you know, we're insane. Yeah. And from that moment on, I said, I will do what I will do for them. Yeah. I'm not doing it for people. So I don't really care what people think. Yeah. You know, back in 1986, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet, and I got severely criticized by people in the movement. A former colleague in Greenpeace came up to me and says, I just want to let you know that what you did in Iceland was unforgivable, reprehensible, criminal, and you know, and I said, yes, so? And he says, well, I think you should know what people think about you. And I said, I don't really care, John. Yeah.
You're not doing this to be liked.
No,
let's face it.
I sank those whaling ships for the whales. Find me one whale anywhere in the world that disagreed with what we did. I promise you we're not going to do it again.
What about people, because I get this a lot with, you know, when I'm not using leather and I'm not using fur and I'm not using all of these materials that are very conventional in my industry. What do you say to people when they say, but this is a massive industry and all these people are going to be out of work? Because you must have a response to that. All these fishermen and all these guys, you know, they're not going to have any jobs if they don't kill all these animals. Nature says you evolve or you die. You don't find anybody selling videos anymore in the video stores because they're not there anymore. You have to adapt. We have to right now adapt from using fossil fuels to alternative energy sources. And in fact, in this country, in the United States, alternative energy is actually employing more people than the fossil fuel industry. So, but people are slow to adapt, but they have to adapt. But also you have to, I think that people have to understand that our way of adapting is not always a good thing. And because we've
had to adapt to diminishment. But the other thing that really bothers me about extinction of species is that we wipe out species and then we forget they were ever here. We denied them. You know, right here in the United States, for instance, the eastern bison, the Labrador duck, the Newfoundland wolf, the Carolina parakeet, you know, the Great Plains wolf, the Atlantic gray whale, I could go on and on. All of these species that have been exterminated in the last couple of hundred years, and we forgot that they ever lived here.
Yeah, they become sort of weird images in a children's book. They go, wow, did that really ever exist? And speaking of plastic bottles then, because that's one thing that we're both, you know, I think tied together on is our love of Parley and partnering with them. So tell me a little bit about how that happened and what that means to you guys.
Well, I first met Cyril Gooch in 2012 when I was arrested in Germany, and Pamela Anderson had told him to come and meet with me, and then he said, well, what can I do, you know, as far as protecting the ocean? And he came up with this idea of, well, focusing on, you know, removal of plastic, because you know, I wrote articles about 20 years ago about plastic in the ocean, and nobody paid attention. Everybody thought, well, that's crazy, you know, what's plastic? It's harmless, it's not going to do anything. But it's now becoming one of the most insidious threats to survival of sea life. And we're now finding that even plankton is ingesting plastic, microplastics, that in turn is in almost any fish that anybody eats has got plastic in it. And so this is, and it's killing so many seabirds and everything else. It's one of the worst pollutants. It's worse than oil, because oil is biodegradable. Oil will break down and bacteria will eat it away. But that hasn't happened with plastic. And so we really have to do everything we can to remove as much plastic as possible. But the real problem is it breaks down into such microscopic pieces which are still there and are literally poison to the ocean.
Wow, so we're going to do something together. Try and bring awareness and try and make it beautiful. Because you know, you really, the minute you become aware of plastic, it is everywhere. And it is a really, really big task to take on. What
we try to do is to tell everybody to do their part. Like all over the world, we have beach cleanups, and so tons and tons of plastic are being gathered up. And it's everywhere. You know, I was sort of exiled in the South Pacific for quite a few months, and on little islands, on deserted islands like Tonga or Samoa, everywhere there was plastic. I gathered tons of it just walking around these deserted islands. And so it's an insidious problem, but again, it's one that people just don't seem to appreciate, you know, the destruction that it's causing.
Or they don't see it beyond a plastic in a bin. And then they just presume that's going to somehow land itself in the right way to be recycled, and then they don't realize the process at all.
But things are changing, people are becoming more aware, but I think that it's really the passion of individuals that will change things.
How many members did you say you had?
I say right now we have about 165 volunteers on the ships. And we have.
And what's the age range?
The oldest crew member we've had was 86. The youngest is 18. And it's people from all sorts of backgrounds, all different nations, all different, like right now, the 165 people, there's 25 different nations involved in that. And people from different skills who have different skills. Not everybody's a sailor. You know, we get criticized by people saying, well, you know, our crew are amateurs, they're not professionals. I said, well, you know, in 1911, the London Times severely criticized Ernest Shackleton for having an amateur crew, and he said, I don't want professionals, I need people to get me where I need to go, and I need that passion, and you don't buy that passion. I could not pay professionals to do what these volunteers do for nothing. And people also say, well, it's unreasonable you ask your crew to risk their life to protect a whale. And I do. I said, when people come on board, I said, are you prepared to risk your life to protect a whale? If they say no, I said, well, then
I can't imagine they'd end up on that ship if they weren't already prepared to do that.
And people say, well, that's not really, that's not very fair, you know, to ask people that much. I said, well, you know, we ask young people all the time to risk their life to protect real estate and flags and religion and oil wells. And so how's this? I think it's a far more noble thing to risk your life to protect an endangered species. But I would say that there's a universal culture called anthropocentrism, which is this idea that we're more important than everything and everything revolves around us. And that has supplanted biocentric cultures like some people like the Yanomami and Amazon or the Aboriginals, and that still have that biocentric point of view. And that's what my point of view is. It's biocentrism, which is that I do not see myself as superior to other animals or even plants, that we're all equal on that. And you know, so, and what we've done with that anthropocentrism is fabricate fantasies that make it look like we're the only species that matter. And how can people believe that animals don't have feelings?
I know.
I mean, just look in that. I mean, walk up to a group of cows in a pasture. Just start talking. next thing you know, they're surrounding you and they're listening to you. And
but also,
you know.
just watch a mother cow when she has her baby. The love that animals have for when they give birth and they're with their babies and they're suckling on them. I mean, you can't dispute that. You really can't. It's providing the solutions that's so key, right? I feel like in what I'm doing, I'm providing a solution. I'm providing an alternative. One
of the keys to change is designers, artists and designers, in a way to use imagination as a tool to change people's perceptions.
Absolutely. I think it's really critical. And when you talk about these, you know, there's so many exciting new companies that are popping up that are looking at how to, you know, reuse all of these materials and design them in a way where people want to buy them and bring them into their homes instead of compromising. You know, you should never compromise. You should never think I'm buying a Parley recycled plastic bag from Stella McCartney in partnership with Sea Shepherd. You think that's a great looking bag and it's better looking than that bag, and I don't care what it's made out of.
Right.
Well, I would like to thank you for being a real person doing real things.